For the one who gave me life, nothing is a sacrifice. Use me how you want to, God, and have your throne within my heart. I hear you call, I am available, and I say yes, Lord, and I am available, and I hear you call, and I am available, and I'll say yes, Lord, I am available. Oh, I'll stay open to you. Oh, I'll stay open to you. Oh, I'm not going anywhere. Oh, this heart is open to you, and I'm not going
altogether wonderful to me. So here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, you're altogether worthy, altogether wonderful. Come on, sing it. Here I am. Here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, you're altogether worthy, you're altogether wonderful to me. Here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, you're altogether worthy, you're altogether wonderful to me.
So wonderful to me. Oh, your love just keeps on giving, and you're so wonderful to me. You reign. So I'm gonna sit here with you. I'm gonna sit here with you.
is a name who reigns without contention, whose power can't be questioned or contained. With humble fame of our heart. Jesus, you're the King and you're the center of it all. There is a name reaching past the margins, calling sons and daughters back to Him. And as He sings, you can hear the roar of heaven as the prodigals are coming home again. Oh, the triumph of His name will never end. Oh, Jesus, enthroned upon the praises of our heart. Jesus, you're the King and you're the center of it all. For every eye will see, every heart will know, there is no name above the name of Jesus. Death could not hold Him down, no grave could keep Him bound, and all sin and sickness bow to Him. Come on, you believe that this morning? Let's proclaim. For every eye will see, every heart will know, there is no name above the name of Jesus. Death could not hold Him down, no grave could keep Him bound, and all sin and sickness bow to the name of Jesus. Jesus, enthroned upon the praises of our heart. Oh, Jesus, you're the King and you're the center of it all. There is a name who reigns without contention, whose power can't be questioned or contained. With humble faith, He rules the earth and heavens. His glory knows no measure or refrain, and it's bursting past the borderlines of space.
You know, every week that I watch these online experiences, I am absolutely blessed by our band and the time that they put in and for leading us into the presence of God. If this is your first or second time with us, I encourage you in the chat feature, if you're watching through our church online platform, there'll be a spot for you to get connected. Just let us know that maybe you're visiting or you're checking us out. Maybe this is your first or second time, and I'd like the opportunity to extend a more personal welcome to you, to drop you a note in the mail, and also just to let you know some of the things that are available in the life of our church right now. Our building is closed, but our church is very, very open, and we're seeing the reach of our church extend into places that we never could have gone if we weren't doing some of what we're doing. right now. You know, several years ago, I was serving a church in the Midwest. And I remember my time there vividly and the friendships that I made. And there was a man who was part of that church who really became, in many ways, like a spiritual father to me. Really, really a blessing. In fact, I spent, a Father's Day with him and that kind of thing. And I remember one particular season, he was out of work. He was out of work, and these were uncertain times for him. And I remember every week he would come in, and I would watch him at church when the offering plate would come around, and I'd see him put something in. Finally, I went to him one day, and I said, I won't say his name for purposes of confidentiality. I said to him, I noticed every week you continue to give. And he said, what's going on the job front? And he said, well, brother, let me teach you something. And I said, what's that? He said, I give because I'm confident that God will supply all of my needs. And I don't give because I make sure this adds up to this, adds up to this. I give because I trust God. And that even in exercising my obedience to Him, He'll continue to meet every need that I have. When that whole season had passed, we got together and we're having breakfast, and he went through a list of ways that God had met every need. He said to me, I never trusted my resources. I decided to trust the one who never stopped providing for me. I want to invite you in this next minute or two to put your hope in the one who can be trusted. I know this is an uncertain season. Believe me, we're feeling some of those uncertainties as a church. But today, you and I have the opportunity to declare before God that our trust is in Him. My family's doing that through this season. And I know many of you are. But these are challenging times. And so I want to invite you, if you're not doing that, to say, God, today, what would you do through me? Some of you, God might be saying, you know what, I want to ask you to do more. Do more? What do you mean do more? These are uncertain times. What if God's saying, let me show off in your life by showing you what I'm able to do, even when it doesn't make any sense? So today, can I invite you to practice generosity to God? To declare not just with your mouth, but with the things that He's given to you, that your trust is in Him. And I believe not only will God supply all of your needs, but He'll supply what's needed here. And we'll continue to move forward in doing all that He's called us to do. Today, let's practice generosity, because that reflects the heart of God. Well, welcome back again, everybody. I'm excited about this next message in this series. And undoubtedly, some of you, well, I know many of you have noticed, particularly the consistency of my wardrobe in some of these messages. And that's because I'm recording many of them at the same time. And I have to tell you, I've discovered something that I've enjoyed particularly about this season. That's been, I feel like I get to tell you a story. And rather than go weeks at a time in between, it's usually just a matter of minutes. I clear my head for a little bit. I take a look at how we continue the thought, and away we go. And it's definitely been interesting. Now, I only can do about 2 of these a day. At one point earlier on, I was meeting with one of our production guys, and I did like 3 or 4 in a day. I was exhausted. And actually, I think I lost something like probably by the 3rd or the 4th. So there's something about resting and allowing things to maybe simmer a little bit. But we're going to dive into the second part in this 5-part series on the life of David. And last week we talked about seeing clearly, acting confidently, and walking humbly. And we asked this question: in what or who have you placed your hope? Because that's going to determine your ability to see clearly, to walk confidently, and to act humbly. And the whole idea of last week, if you're tuning in today for the first time or you missed last week, is one of the challenges in ancient times, particularly with the nation of Israel, is God wanted to be their king. But they demanded that they get their own king, somebody they could see, feel, and touch, a human being. And they did. And they put their hope there and their confidence there. Meanwhile, God continued to say to them and to remind them, I want you to put your hope in me. And this boy David would come along, who would grow up to be one of the kings of Israel, in fact, the most influential of all of them. But he would remind the people of where they ought to put their hope. And so today, I want to do a message titled Killer Giants. We often associate the story of David with Goliath. And the only other part of his story that we really spend much time talking about was the affair with Bathsheba and having her husband killed. And then we sort of disregard all of that and say, let's just focus on the Psalms, because they can make us feel a little bit better about life and what we're facing. And yet the Psalms are riddled with the humanity of David, the depths of his despair, his emotions, all of that. We get such a vulnerable, transparent glimpse into his life. And we see that not only Goliath, but David battled some killer giants in his own life, just like you and just like me. We're reminded of his humanity out of his vulnerability and his transparency. You know, I grew up in an era where we were taught that pastors should not be transparent and vulnerable. That's not how you lead the people. You don't get too personal. There's something in me about that just never felt right. And I have to tell you, I've tried for 22 years of ministry to lead out of a place of vulnerability and to be transparent, to be authentic. And if that resonates with you, I just have to say, the other side of that is, if you want vulnerability, transparency, and honesty, you also have to live that yourself and extend grace when you see my humanity, which you will. And if you haven't, just talk to my wife. She'll be happy to clue you in on those things. Because I'm a human. And I make mistakes. There are things where I go back and say, I think I would do that differently. I think I'd handle that differently. I think I'd speak to that person differently. I think I'd navigate that situation differently. And lest you think that this is about me, it really sets the stage for the example that we see set in David. But something happens, and the way of God isn't very appealing when we're angry, when we feel isolated, or when we're afraid. See, that's when we consider things we would not otherwise consider. We act in ways that we might not otherwise act. We say things we might not otherwise say. We burn bridges that oftentimes later on down the path, after those things that were causing anger or isolation or fear pass, we wish we could walk over again. So what do you do? What do you do if you're watching this series 5 years from now? COVID is long past and it's about a marriage, or it's about a business thing, or it's about a friendship or a relationship. I'm going to unpack this a little bit, but don't run. Remember what God has done and what he's able to do, and don't move until you are led. Big life lessons. Because you are not forsaken. And sometimes facing your giants is how you escape them. Because oftentimes, listen to me, some of you don't even need to listen to the rest of this message. This will be enough for you. God will use the giants before he removes the giants. God will use them before he removes them. See, the problem is the ways of God are usually pretty unappealing, and they seem to be irrelevant when we're angry, when we're isolated, when we're afraid, when we're tempted to say, I've got to take this into my own hands. God, I trust you, but I have to have a plan B. I've got to make sure that if you don't come through, I can have this covered. And these three conditions have the power to undermine the resolve of even the most dedicated, devout, and disciplined among us. Some of you are longtime Christians who are nodding your head. You're thinking about a person who walked down the path and you thought, I never thought they would. I never thought that would be the decision they would make. I never thought for them it would go that way. It can cause us to crash through every moral and ethical boundary that we've set for ourselves. And in fact, those things, anger, isolation, and fear, have contributed to our greatest regrets. And by the way, will be part of our future regrets. See, we feel compelled to do something, to do anything. And what we do is we rely on instinct, or what comes naturally, or what worked before. And we often make decisions that complicate our lives, decisions that have consequences far worse than the pain associated with loneliness, fear, and rejection. And those consequences often actually leave us feeling more lonely, more afraid, or more rejected. See, in the moment, it feels good. In the moment, it pacifies something that we think that we need, something that's going to bring a sense of completeness or wholeness, or give us some sense of, oh, now I'm right. Now I have some power, and now I feel empowered. And then our worlds come crashing through. And what seems so right in the moment leaves us saying, I wish I'd never done that. I wish I'd never made that decision. I wish I'd never entertained that relationship with that person, or that business deal, or that temptation, or I wish in the middle of that fight I had exercised some self-control, because now I can't take my words back. What is it? And I watch otherwise discerning, intelligent people make bad, life-complicating decisions when facing these three emotions. David was a legend. He actually married the king's daughter and was deepest of friends with the king's son, Jonathan. He was a folk hero because he killed the Philistine champion, Goliath, a huge win for Team Israel. But the king, Saul, was jealous. In fact, he was so jealous, he hurled a spear at David. So David obviously stopped showing up for dinner, stopped hanging out at Saul's house. And Saul asked his son Jonathan where he was. Not because he cared that David was okay, but because Saul was bound and determined to take David's life because David was taking Saul's thunder. And Jonathan, because he loved David even more than a brother, there was a love between them that was deep. Jonathan covered for him, and Saul picked up on it. His own family was conspiring against him. Look at what he says in the book of 1 Samuel chapter 20, verses 30 and 31. Saul's anger flared up at Jonathan, his son, his own son, and he said to him, "You son of a perverse and rebellious woman. Don't I know that you've sided with this son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of the mother who bore you? As long as the son of Jesse lives on this earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. Now send someone to bring him to me, for he has to die." Saul is so gripped by jealousy that it gives birth to anger and fury, to the point where he is tearing his son apart and is out for David's head. And Jonathan, because he loves David, warns him. David's 22 years old. And now he's on the run. He's alone. Listen now. He's alone. He's afraid for his life. And he's being rejected by the man who represents the nation that he bled for. And he did nothing wrong. He's isolated, he's afraid, and he's angry. Why are you doing this to me? I fought for you. I wasn't even in the army of the Israelites. I was just delivering fast food to the guys. By the way, you know who else is isolated, angry, and afraid? Saul. So David panics, and he goes into survival mode, which for a warrior can be dangerous territory. So he decides to take matters into his own hands. And I want you to catch this story for what isn't always obvious until you tear it apart a little bit. 1 Samuel 21. David went to Nob, to Ahimelech, the priest. Now, Jerusalem was not part of Israel yet, and the Ark of the Covenant, where the presence of God was, would move around. And so David goes to Nob, to Ahimelech, the priest, and Ahimelech trembled when he met him. And he asked him, "Why are you alone?" Alone. Why is no one with you? And David answered Ahimelech the priest. By the way, he's going to lie. Here's a guy that is against lying, but he was afraid. So much for the ways of God. The king sent me on a mission and said to me, "No one is to know anything about the mission I'm sending you on. As for my men, I've told them to meet me at a certain place." Now, if Ahimelech was smart, he would have said, "Well, where? Let me talk to the king." He had no men. He was afraid that Ahimelech wouldn't help him. And so he lies. And as you'll see, that lie would cost Ahimelech and his family their lives. Now then, David says, what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread or whatever you can find. But the priest answered David, I don't have any ordinary bread on hand. However, there's some consecrated bread here that provided the men have kept themselves from women. They're clean. See, every Sabbath, bread would be put on the altar of God. And when it was replaced, the priest would eat it. So since it was dedicated to God, only the ceremonially clean could touch it or eat it. See, David's depending on his own ingenuity, his own cunning to get his needs met. He forgot that what God has the power to arrange, he has the power to sustain. He forgot that God would take care of him. God had taken him from being a nobody to being a somebody. And God was able to maintain David without his cunning, without his lying. Think about it. David began alone. Shepherding was lonely. These guys would often be out in fields without any human contact for hours upon end. And God makes him a king. And now that he was anointed king, he felt the need to maintain his position. So the priest gave him the consecrated bread. He lied to be fed. What happened to "in you I put my trust"? My hope is in you all day long. David asked Ahimelech, don't you have a spear or a sword here? I haven't brought my sword or any other weapon because the king's mission was urgent. Listen to what the priest says. The sword of Goliath, the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, is here. Suddenly, in that moment, David was reminded of the afternoon he did the unthinkable and wandered down into no man's land to challenge a giant. It all comes flooding back. What happened to the clear-eyed, courageous, God-fearing shepherd boy? What is happening to him in his anger, his isolation, and his fear? Listen to what it goes on to say in 1 Samuel 17:47. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. That's what he says when he's in the valley with the Philistine. Why is it now that he's lying for some bread and of all things asking for the spear of the one that he had slain by the power and the might of God? What happened to the boy who ran toward rather than away from fear, anger, and loneliness? See, those 3 giants have the potential to cause us to forget the defeated giants of the past, don't they? They cause us to abandon all that we know to be true about God. And to take things into our own hands. Look at 1 Samuel 21:9. The priest replied, the sword of Goliath, the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, is here. It is wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you want it, take it. There's no sword here but that one. David would regret this decision for the rest of his life. It would become a permanent part of his story if David would just have stopped in that moment and played the tape. How is this going to play out? What's going to happen when I have to tell my boss? What's going to happen when someone discovers? What's going to happen when I have to face my wife? What's going to happen when I have to face my children? What's going to happen when I have to face my family? He took matters into his own hands. And this is what he says: there is none like that sword. Give it to me. He lies and he's fleeing from crazy King Saul. He takes matters into his own hands with a sword that was last wielded by a warrior, felled by a 15-year-old boy. David, of all the weapons you can choose, you choose the one that belonged to the guy slain by you at 15 years old by the power of God himself. Really, David? That's what you need? A flawed weapon, a flawed response, and by the way, a disastrous outcome. And there we are, living in the reality of a set of decisions we will forever wish we hadn't made. See, when we need God the most, our human nature is to lean in the least. And we opt for things that did not work before, that did not get us to where we are, and that often lead to regret. But we think that momentary satisfaction is better than long-term peace. And we can see it in others. But it's hard to see it in the mirror. I mean, your situation is different, isn't it? That's what David thought. I mean, if God were with me, this wouldn't be happening to me. But sometimes God doesn't remove it until you've learned through it. Is he sovereign? Is he all-knowing? Is he all-powerful? Does he still have the whole world in his hands? Then your situation's not a surprise to him. My situation's not a surprise to him. See, it's easy to trust God when we have nothing that we have to entrust him with and nothing we have to trust him for. Think about that. It's harder to trust him when something of value starts slipping away. So David takes Goliath's sword and he flees to, of all places, the Philistines. They don't trust him. So he fakes insanity. He's drooling and scratching and ultimately, you know where he finds himself? In a cave. Isolated, angry, afraid, and alone. And he finally comes to the end of himself. And he finds a prophet and he asks, what would God have me do? But by this point, the damage is done. Saul's chief herdsman saw David with the priest and goes back to Saul and reports to him. Listen what it says in 1 Samuel 22. Ahimelech inquired of the Lord for him. He also gave him provisions and the sword of Goliath, the Philistine. You can only imagine that Saul is going to begin to seethe. Then the king sent for the priest Ahimelech and all the men of his family who were the priests at Nob, and they all came to the king. Let me ask you, how do you think they're feeling? Saul said to him, why have you conspired against me? You and the son of Jesse, giving him bread and a sword and inquiring of God for him so that he would rebel against me and lies in wait for me as he does today? Ahimelech answered the king, who of all your servants is as loyal as David, the king's son-in-law? captain of your bodyguard, and highly respected in your household, to a normal, God-fearing, rational human being, they would have said, you know, you're right. Not Saul. He's ticked. Was that day the first time I inquired of God for him? Of course not. Let not the king accuse your servant or any of his father's family, for your servant knows nothing at all about this whole affair. But the king said, you will surely die, Ahimelech, you and your whole family. Listen to this. Then the king ordered the guards at his side to turn and kill the priests of the Lord, because they too have sided with David. Saul is neurotic here, folks. He is now burning bridges with people who he thinks don't agree with him or are setting out to conspire against him, when really Saul's just a product of his own neurotic compulsion and obsession with finding David, and somehow thinking that if he can find David and kill him, the people will like him again and he'll be restored and everything will be good. No, Saul has a God problem in where he's put his hope and his trust. Turn and kill the priests of the Lord, because they too have sided with David. They knew he was fleeing, and yet they did not tell me. And do you know that in that point of the story, Saul had 85 priests killed, and he ordered the death. He was so absolutely obsessed with the situation and with retribution that not only does he have the 85 priests killed, he orders the death of everyone in Nob, men, women, children, and infants, an absolute atrocity at a man who at just a few years earlier, 7 years earlier, saw the hand of God free the people of Israel from the Philistines. And one of Ahimelech's sons flees to David and reports. And upon hearing the report, David says this: I am responsible for the death of your whole family. Taking matters into our own hands feels good, but rarely does it turn out good. What is your loneliness, anger, or fear causing you to consider that you never would have considered before? Who is your loneliness, anger, or fear causing you to consider that you know you shouldn't consider? Who besides you do your considerations put at risk? How about this? What advice would you give somebody who is you? I know what advice David would give. He wrote it in his journal. Listen to this. From Psalms chapter 9, verses 9 and 10. The Lord is a refuge for the oppressed, a stronghold in times of trouble. Run to, not away from him. See, David should have wrote, I took refuge in my ability to control outcomes, or to think that I could control outcomes, and the outcome was a disaster. No, he writes this: those who know your name trust in you, for you, Lord, have never forsaken those who seek you. Today is August 2nd, 2020. God, the God who created the heavens and the earth. If ever there was a clear message, it is God saying to the people that he has created in his image, seek me first. Seek me first. Where is your trust? In who is your trust? What are you considering? Those who know your name trust in you. For you, Lord, have never forsaken those who seek you. If David might have kept writing, he might have said this: I thought I had been forsaken, but I was mistaken. Don't make that mistake. 1,000 years later, David's most famous descendant would look into the eyes of frightened, overtaxed, seemingly abandoned Israelites. And he would say this: come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, tired, heavy, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke. My yoke? By the way, who's saying this? Today in the city of David, out of the line of David, a Savior has been born. And his name is Christ the Lord. Jesus. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. Learn from me? What is the example of the life of Jesus? Fighting? Demanding to be right? Demanding to be comfortable? To satisfy the desires of our flesh? Take my yoke and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart. You want to know my way? I stretched out my arms and I laid down my life. Jesus' whole example was an example of opposites. You want to know the way up? The way up is down. You want to be great in my kingdom? Learn to be a servant. If you want to be wealthy in my kingdom, sell everything you have, give it to the poor, and come follow me, because I care more about having you than having your stuff or you having stuff. Your kingdom not working for you? Jesus said, try mine. I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. When you feel forsaken, you are mistaken. Don't run, remember. And don't move until you're led. Psalm 9:9, the Lord is a refuge for the oppressed, a stronghold in times of trouble. But let me say it to you like this. The Lord is a refuge for the oppressed, your stronghold in times of trouble. He has not left you. He has not forsaken you. He has not abandoned you. He is not punishing you. He is running to you to put his arms around you and to say to you today, it is going to be okay. Take my yoke upon yourself. I'm humble and gentle in heart, and I will give you rest for your soul. Learn from me. Jesus says. And learn from the life of David, because there's much to be learned. We'll pick up again next week with part 3 in this series. Let me pray for you. Suffice it to say, God, every one of us, including me, has at times made decisions out of anger or isolation or fear. And I certainly know not a one of them has turned out well. And I'm grateful that you've protected and preserved. I also know that I can look back on decisions and say very clearly, I wish I hadn't made that decision. If I knew then what I knew now, if my 44-year-old self could talk to my 15-year-old self or my 20-year-old self. And today, undoubtedly, there are people on the other side of a screen seeing this message saying, I understand that. There are people today that are afraid, feel lonely and isolated, feel a latent sense of anger and anxiety. I understand all of those today. But today, perhaps we declare with this very human songwriter, shepherd, king, warrior David, I lift my eyes to the hills. My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. Dare I say that the greatest outcome of this season that we find ourselves in is we will point our gaze to God, and the greatest renewal that history has seen may be coming just around the corner. Because I believe, God, you have our attention. And I simply declare before you today that I trust you. Maybe today where you are, you're sitting with your family or your spouse, maybe just out loud, you need to say, God, we trust you. Try that. God, we trust you. And wait on God. Don't run. Remember what he's done in your life. Remember this defining moment. Don't do anything until you know he's leading you. And if you're not sure, talk to somebody. Here's what I'm feeling. Here's what I'm sensing. Here's what I'm thinking maybe I ought to do. What do you think? Can you speak in? And allow God to speak. Lord, thank you for your love for us, for your mercies that are new every morning, for your presence, and for your hope. Thank you for the life of David from whom we can learn. We trust you. And our hope is in you today. In Jesus' name, amen.
It's just the mention of your name. We're not alone here within His love. Emmanuel, He is still with us. We're not alone here within His love. Emmanuel, He is still with us. Oh, He's still with us. Oh, He's never gonna leave us. No. Never gonna leave us. And mercy is falling, falling. Lift up your hands, receive it now. Here in the presence of the Lord, and mercy is falling, falling. Lift up your hands, receive it now. Here in the presence of the Lord, and I know your past is broken, and you can move on. It's over now. Here in the presence of the Lord, and I know your past is broken. You can move on. It's over now. Here in the presence of the Lord, I'm tired of running, running. Be still and know He's in control. Here in the presence of the Lord, pour out your heart before Him. Open your arms, He'll hold you now. Here in the presence of the Lord, pour out your heart before Him. Open your arms, He'll hold you now. Here in the presence of the Lord. Oh, He's holding you now in His arms. He's holding you now in His arms. And mercy is falling, falling on us now. Lift up your hands, receive it now. You're in the presence of the Lord, and mercy is falling, it's falling in your arms. Lift up your hands, receive
Let me give you a blessing today as you go on your way. But before I do that, let me remind you that immediately following these services at 9:30 and 11:15, we're going to have a virtual hangout. We're calling it kind of an afterglow after the services. Either myself or one of our pastors will be there. We just want to say hello, give you the opportunity to see each other, say hello to each other, to talk about what God's been up to in your lives, maybe talk a little bit about the message that you just heard. So right when this service is done, after I give you this blessing, watch your screen. Okay? Or if you're watching in the chat feature, we'll put that information in there for you to log in. We'll put it in there as a link. It'll be a Zoom room for you to go into just to say hello. And we hope that you'll take the opportunity to do that. All right? I pray that the Lord would bless you and keep you. I pray that the Lord would make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. I pray that the Lord would look upon you with his favor and give you his peace that passes all understanding, and that would guard your heart and guard your mind in Christ Jesus. Have a great week. In just a couple of minutes, I hope to see you in our virtual hangout. Have a great week, everybody.